Okay, we're officially live. I'm going to begin. Okay, before we begin, we are in the middle of Hilchos Netilas Yadayim that we started last week. And Meretz Hashem, we're going to hopefully finish it today. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. Okay. I want to bring up something we just learned in the recent Tanyas of the days regarding the effect of learning halacha. In a Farbrengen that took place in Yerushalayim years ago, there were two veteran Chabad Chassidim who were Farbrengening, and one of them, who was actually an accomplished Paisik, quite an accomplished Paisik, began, lauding how about shluchim and all the work that they do, and how his sons are in shluchus, etc., etc. And to explain how they're going out and they're accomplishing and doing things. And sitting next to him was a veteran Rosh Kollel, and he said, "I don't understand. The perspective is very, very wrong." He says, "Of course, 100% shluchim, people who are going out and doing these amazing things, they're doing a great work. But you can't underestimate that the work that you do and the work that I do in Kollel, where we teach halacha, where we clarify halacha, and the idea that a person, the idea that some people have, like as if the main accomplishment is only be done through shlichus, and those who sit and learn Torah are not exactly accomplishing the best or the most through doing so, is a mistake." And he, for being about this, he was very hurt, and he was actually giving the other person over the head for this way of thinking. He says, "Well, I was just praising them. I didn't have in mind to negate anything else." In any event, why am I bringing this up? One of the whole ideas of going out into the world and doing shlichus is in order to refine those lost sparks. We know that in last week's Parshas Lech Lecha, when Avram Avinu received the divine mission, "Leave your birthplace and go to the land that I will show you," began the famous treasure hunt. The hunt for the treasures of the Netzitzis, the sparks of Kedusha, that fell from the world of Tayu, that fell through the sin of Adam and Eve. And that's what we're searching for. Since then, we are searching to elevate those sparks. Avram Avinu began that mission. And how was it done? Through going to various places of the world, eating and drinking, and using the objects of the world for the sake of God. And Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, in this chapter of Tanya that we just finished in Siman Chav Gimel, novelizes, I think, something amazing that we cannot overlook. And he says, I'm going to read his words of what he writes. Where did I go? No, it's in Chav Vav. It's in Siman Chav He, sorry. Igeres Chav He. Hamaskal Yevin Inyan Pela Gadol Mizeh Ma'id. The intellectual understand a great wonderment that occurs in heaven above through researching and clarifying halacha psuka in Gemara and Poskim Rishonim and Achronim. In other words, that aside for the learning, when a person learns halacha, that they learn what's right and what's wrong, even if the cases never come up and the matters in the end of the day are left as abstract, non-practical, just the idea that a person clarifies and organizes God's will, halachas, and understands what's mutter and what's aser, he says, this causes to remove the klippas that surrounded that halacha. Anytime that there's this is universal as well as individual. Anytime that there's a halacha that's unclear in the world, that means that there's a global klippa surrounding that halacha, and that's why it's not clear what the answer is. So when Poskim research and write shuvas and come up with the answer, they are in essence refining it from the klippas. They are removing the klippas from it. And the same way it is universally, so too it is individually. When an individual has something unclear in halacha, that means that there's a level of klippa surrounding it. When a person studies halacha, it ends up removing that klippa from it. And he then continues. Through a person doing so, he extracts the nitzutzim of kedusha, the sparks of kedusha that were stuck in those klippas from the time of Shiur HaKelim. In other words, that the same way there's a way of doing shlichus to find the nitzutzas by traveling to Yehupitzville and saying a bracha over water there, so too through sitting in Tsfat on top of a mountain surrounded by nature, excluded and secluded from the world. When you learn Torah, especially not just any Torah but halacha, a person refines and extracts the sparks of kedusha. And he writes that this is the reason why the malachim come down and listen to the Torah that a person learns. And this is what the Talmud states, that whoever learns Torah, God considers it as if that you have redeemed me and my children from amongst the nations. Why? As there are sparks of kedusha stuck in these ideas and these halachas that are unclear. And when a person clarifies them and understands them on his own, then he has in essence redeemed God and himself from amongst the nations of the world, meaning from amongst the klippas. Why himself? I understand that we're redeeming the sparks, redeeming God. The answer is as follows. The same way that God created a global mission that we have to refine all the sparks and we have to draw down the Shekhinah for universal messianic times, which is for everybody, there's also a very individual redemption. Every single individual has a certain amount of refinement that he personally has to take care of, and nobody else can. It's in his, it's on his to-do list, and no one else can volunteer to do it for him. So the Alter Rebbe therefore continues and writes that the Arizal teaches us that every single Jew has a ability and obligation to clear and to clarify them, and by doing so, he is redeeming those sparks that are relevant to him. That's why everybody has a different chelik in Torah. Every person has a different portion in Torah that they have a greater intuition towards, and they have the ability to refine from the Sitrach. Now, Rebbe says that this Avodah is only during the times of Galus. And the Geula, everything's going to be already redeemed, and we're actually not going to need to have any more shiurim of halacha, because we're going to learn it one time and never forget it. Everything's going to be clear. The klippas are no longer going to surround the halachas. So this shiur is temporary. Chassidus shiurim will continue in mass. However, he writes that for the Erev Rav, they will still require shiurim and niglas. So I will not be out of a job, but just my crowd will change. The people who show up to the shiurim will be different.
I'm happy to be at the last shiur.
Okay, so I thought that was something very important to emphasize. We just learned it, chapter 26. It's a tough chapter, but and there's a lot of information there, but that's one of the things. Chavav, Igeres HaKodesh of Tanya. Okay, so let's do this. Hilchos and the Tilas Yadayim. We began last week in the laws of washing hands for bread. Again, as we focus on that as opposed to, in contrast to washing for hands in the morning, which is its own subject. Washing hands for bread, and we began with an introduction of the history of the command, when it began, and also the Chassidic explanation. So let's review a little bit. We stated that the washing the hands for bread didn't begin till when? Who remembers? Till the times of? So we said it didn't begin till the times of Rabbi Akiva, after the destruction of the Second Temple. We said the chronological order of the decree was as follows. In the times of King Solomon, he decreed on kohanim, or not just kohanim, but anybody who eats kachim, karbanis, to wash hands before they eat karbanis. Then in the times of Shammai, we discussed this on length last week, they did the political trick. They took over parliament, locked the gates of the parliament in the attic of Chizkiah, didn't allow Beis Hillel, didn't let the Democrats in, and then they overruled and voted for 18 pieces of legislation. One of them was washing hands for Truma. Truma. That's for Kohanim, because non-Kohanim can't eat Truma. And then after that time, in the times of Rabbi Akiva, we don't know if he was the one who decreed it, but it was in the times of Rabbi Akiva, after destruction of the Second Temple, they finally made a decree that you have to wash hands for bread. So after Tchias HaMesim, you're going to see all these people eating bread without washing hands.
Yeah.
Don't scold them. They don't know any better. You can give them the newspaper, show them time. Things have been updated, since your time. A lot of things have passed since your time, and they're not being thrown. They just didn't get to this decree. So we explained based on Chassidus, what is the reason? So based on Allah, the reason is to protect that you wash for Truma, in order so people know to wash for Truma, since most Truma is bread. So therefore the Chazal said, we're going to make everybody wash for bread in order to ensure that the Kohanim wash for Truma. That's the technical halachic reason of why they made the added decree. In general, the decrees are always made in order to protect the initial laws. Very similar in any legislative body, that they pass a law, they see that, this law isn't really working, so we got to now put some more screws in the law to make it work. So, they first decreed for Kainim, Truma, and then they said, everybody's going to wash for bread, and then for sure the Kainim wash for Truma. The spiritual reason we explained last week, as the Mittler had explained in the Sefer Derech HaChaim, is that when we eat food, every food contains a taste and a satiation that it provides, which both are surrounded and come from Klippa, as since the sin of Adam Arishan, everything is mixed with good and evil. So food contains evil, and we have to try to make sure after eating food that we limit the intake of the evil so it doesn't cause our Yetzer Hara to sin. How do we do that? One of the ways of doing it is by washing hands. By washing hands with water. Water is chesed. It prevents the nails, which is representing of klipa, from nurturing from the kedusha in the food and feeding the klipas. So that's, we said, was the spiritual reason behind it. It's in order to refine the meal to make it a spiritual experience, or at least a less damaging experience. Okay, we're now going to discuss the general scope of the decree. So the decree was not just on washing hands for bread, but actually for washing hands for anything dipped in liquid as well. So let's elaborate on this a little bit. When the Chacham decreed to wash hands for bread, bread is defined, first of all, let's define bread. Bread is defined as any food item that is made from the 5 grains, and you have to say hamaitzi over it. In other words, that the same way we have difference of brachas between different types of bread, some are known as hamaitzi bread, some known as mazenis breads, so too in the washing hands we have a difference, that anything that's hamaitzi requires washing, anything that's not hamaitzi does not require washing. So for example, if a person eats a pretzel, it's made from the 5 grains, the Chachamim never enacted a decree to wash for such a product when you eat it. Furthermore, if a person kneaded dough with milk, it's majority milk, liquid, that's considered pasab b'kistin. We do not say hamaitzi on such bread unless you have a set meal over it. So likewise, you do not have to wash over such bread. Pizza, if they're making the dough of the pizza with apple juice or whatever other juice that's majority over water, then once again the dough is mazenis. You also don't have to wash. But if you decide to be kaveh suda, to set a meal over it, in the same way that you have to now say hamaitzi, you also have to wash. So that's how it works. So for example, a person he says, I don't want to wash, I don't want to bench, I'm just going to have 2 slices that are below 240 grams, and I'm not going to be full, according to everybody doesn't have to wash. And we ate 2 slices, and it's good pizza. And he has another 3 in front of him. So what do we do now? So in such a case, he has to say an alamichya, take a little break, wash, eat more. He says hamaitzi, not mezainis. He says hamaitzi this time, and he benches. So we see sometimes within the same food, at times you'll say hamaitzi, and at times you'll say mezainis. Sometimes even within the same meal, at times you say mezainis, depending on what is happening with this food. As again, the whole purpose of why the Chacham made the decree was because of truma. Truma was mainly eaten, right? It's the 5. Biblically, we said this last week. Truma is only on the 5 grains, oil and grape juice. Oil and grape juice are not, they're drunk, they're not eaten. So in terms of eating, it's only really on bread. So this was the made decree. They only made the decree of washing on actual bread, not on mazenis products.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry. The 5 grains are, and grape juice are what?
The biblical obligation of tithing products in Eretz Yisrael is only on the 5 grains wine and olive oil, not any oil, but specifically olive oil. So when we're discussing washing hands for food, the only food relevant to those three is the 5 grains, which is used to make bread. So that's why they only decreed on bread. They didn't decree on Mazonos products for the washing, unless you set a meal in it, as we said before. It's not just with it's something that looks like bread. Even if a person has pretzels, if a person's hungry and he wants to finish a whole bag of pretzels, that's what he has to eat. A whole bag of pretzels, 750 grams. 750 grams he has to wash and bench according to everybody, because it's called Kviyas Suda. He had over 330 and he's going to be full. So that's it. He's going to wash and just like he would for regular bread. So again, it's not that the obligation of washing is only for bread. The obligation of washing is for anything you have to say Hamaitzi for. Okay, that's the real application. Now let's talk about the things dipped in liquids, foods dipped in liquids. So together with the decree of washing for bread, they also said you got to wash for anything dipped in liquid, and the reason is as follows. The reason why the kohanim would have to wash for truma is because the hands are tameh, and you want to make your hands untameh before you eat truma. Similar idea, they made a decree for bread. Now, whenever a food item becomes wet, in the laws of tumah we have the following rule. A food item cannot contract impurity unless it became wet first. So, for example, if I picked tomatoes off my, I'll give a real example. I picked lemons from my tree. Are they tameh? No, because have they gotten wet from the time period between you picking them off and them being in your hands? No, they haven't. They're dry and I just picked them off. So they have never become susceptible to impurity. For something to become susceptible to impurity, it's called machshirei tuma, to be muchshir for tuma, it has to first be wet. It has to be wet after it's detached, as otherwise everything always wet when it's attached. That's how it grows. So it's referring to when it's detached. And this is why we tell people when they separate truma and meiser, especially in Yerushalayim, always wet the fruits and vegetables before you separate, in order to make it tameh, as you're only allowed to redeem tameh meiser sheni in Yerushalayim if it's tameh. That's why, especially in Yerushalayim, we tell them always wet. It's good to always wet it anyways, whenever you're doing it for other reasons, but this especially applies because we want it to contract impurity, and it won't contract impurity if it's not wet. Okay, now, based on that understanding, and back in the day, and this will occur again when Mashiach comes, people were very careful on this. They try to eat only pure food, even though you don't have to in a din, but they would try to eat only pure food. Even a non-kohen, for a kohen for sure, he has to eat only pure food. But even a non-kohen, even regular Jews like us, we would try to eat only pure food, and this would create a big headache. Just imagine you have to be careful that no one whose tummy touches your food. There's all these different types of tumas, and so once the food gets wet, well, if you make sure that your foods never get wet, then it's protected from contracting impurity. So the Chacham said like this: being that a food getting wet makes it susceptible to impurity, therefore you have to wash hands before you touch a wet food. Before you eat a wet food. There's no problem in touching. You can touch a wet apple, but if you want to eat it when it's wet, that's when we have a problem. Okay, so we're going to read this inside and go through some details of this obligation. Kol Michael Shetibuli b'mashke. Ben shemetabli achshav sha'ichloi, ben she'ematub melucham mikodim, ben sak v'adayin, compares kushin meshlukim v'shalom, v'shusach desadayim, k'chaz ha'pech v'leivavich. All foods that are dipped in liquids, so notice already we have debunked a misnomer, and that is the people think only fruits that are dipped in liquids have to be washed for. Not correct. Any food, it says kol meichel, any food. So you don't have to ask, well, does it include even this? It says any food. I mean, it's kind of straightforward. All foods.
Any food that's dipped? Correct.
Well, what does dip mean? Let's hold our horses. But let's first say what foods are we referring to? All foods. Clear, okay? Not just fruits. All foods, any food, meaning even a piece of meat, even a piece of chicken, even a mushroom, okay? Anything that's dipped in liquid is already entering this discussion. There's no exclusion by certain foods. So kol mashke, which is dipped into a liquid. Now, some people want to say, as you just pointed out, only if it's dipped. But if it happens to be wet, then it's okay. You don't have to wash. So, for example, if I washed apples because they're dirty. I want to get the wax off of them, the pesticide off of them. So you can eat them. If I wash grapes, you can eat them. It's only if you dip them. So only, by the Seder, when you dip your vegetable into the salt water, that's when you have to wash hands. But in essence, all the other times, who dips their food in liquid? Okay, when you dip your cake in coffee, but that is not correct. 1 second, but that is not a correct notion. It's not only when you dip. The Alter Rebbe here rules. Whether you are right now dipping it or whether it was already wet due to other reasons and wasn't yet dried. So clearly, the Alter Rebbe is negating another misnomer here. It makes no difference how it is wet. The fact is it wet? Don't start an investigation committee. How did it get wet? It doesn't matter. It's wet. And certainly, of course, this would apply if you dip it, right? Even more so. But it applies even if you didn't dip it, just happens to be wet. You left your apple on a wet counter, so it's wet. You washed your grapes because you want to clean them. They're wet. Okay? Or he says, Peris kavushim, you pickled your vegetable. You put cucumbers in brine, so they're wet. Like basar mavushal, or you cooked meat. Again, it's not just vegetables or fruits, even meat that is wet. It was cooked in water. It's wet. Tzarich natilas yadayim. You need to wash hands for it. Kehilchasa, properly. It's not okay. Just wet your hands and you're good. No, the same way you wash them for bread. The same thing. The same way you wash for bread, that's how you have to wash for things dipped in liquids, foods dipped in liquids. Or wet from liquids. Oh, we'll get there. You're always one step ahead. Unbelievable.
I'm going to just ask the same thing. So if I'm eating an apple and I cut it up into quarters and I dip it in peanut butter, is that dipping?
So you've definitely done the act of dipping. I think we can agree to the English term to be used. But the question is peanut butter a liquid that can make an apple contract impurity? Well, we haven't gotten to that yet either. We will get to a list of the 7 liquids.
Right. And then with a fork, there's also
6 liquids.
It's only if you eat it with your hands, or what if you eat with a fork?
We're going to get to that too.
Okay, good.
We have a whole slide here with.
Are you going to get to
maybe we should get. Maybe we can start using this. No, we can start using this. I can attach it, and you can see you can already see what's upcoming.
Are you going to get to if you wash the apple and then dry it thoroughly? Are you going to get to that?
Well, actually, we said that. So I'll point that out. We read v'lo nisnagev adayin, and it wasn't yet dried. Okay. Even though once something has become wet and officially contracts impurity, even if it's no longer wet, nonetheless, in this halacha of washing hands for things dipped in liquid, it only applies if the food is right now wet. Okay. So yes, one of the ways of circumventing the need to wash is simply to dry it. Yes. So you have 2 options: either dry it or wash your hands like you do for negel vaser in the morning, negel vaser for bread, and then it's mutter. Mm-hmm. Now, how dry does it have to be? So the answer is like this. Whenever wetness is discussed in halacha, it always means tefeach hamanas latfiach. This means it's wet enough to wet something else. If something is not wet enough to wet a second item, it's not considered wet. For example, if I touch the wet apple and then I touch another finger and this finger doesn't feel wet, then it's not wet anymore, even though technically there's still moisture on it. So it has to be wet enough to wet something else. So it doesn't have to be perfectly dry. The idea is, so long as it's past the finger test, it is dry enough to be able to eat. So you need to wash regularly. Now, just we explained this last week, just like for bread, we wash 3 times. So in each hand, so for this as well, we would wash 3 times. Those who wash only once with a revius would wash only once with a revius. Those who wash twice would wash twice. Whatever you do for bread, you would do here as well. Now, just like for bread, we lechatchila wash until over here, till the wrist. So to here, you would wash till the wrist, till the wrist. Bottom line is that all halachas are the same. Whatever you follow for washing for bread, you would follow here as well. For that reason, also, you won't talk. A lot of people ask on the night of the Seder, can I talk? Which I always find funny. Like, what's the big deal if you don't talk for a few seconds? You know?